So, I live in the Pacific Northwest, a region known for its many beautiful camping spots. One of my favorite places isn't an official campground, but rather a forest road that runs right beside a river. Being a moody young woman, I often took trips in my beat-up Honda Accord to that spot, so I could be alone, sit by the river, and think through whatever was weighing on my mind. Camping by myself as a woman in my 20s always made both me and my parents a little anxious, but I didn't let that stop me. Being alone in nature was something I truly enjoyed, and after going through a rough patch emotionally, I really needed that space. The last time I ever visited that spot, I must have been about 22. I had just had a final talk with someone who had broken my heart a few months earlier, and I wanted some time to process everything. Luckily, I had a couple days off in a row from work, so I packed up the car and made the 4-hour drive to my usual place. This spot was fairly well known, and on weekends there were usually a few other people around, but during the week it was often empty. When I arrived, it was late afternoon, and I was a little disappointed to see a blue Ford truck and another gray car parked near the river. I parked a short distance away from them and started unloading my things. There were 2 young guys hanging out by the truck, and when I walked past, they said hello. I mumbled a quick greeting and kept walking. I picked a nice spot, then went back to grab the rest of my stuff. As I passed their cars again, one of the guys, the shorter, stockier one, quickly rushed over to a rock near the trail where I later learned there were BB guns sitting, and hurried to hide them. "Oh, sorry about that. Didn't mean to startle you," he said. There was something a little childish in the way he acted, almost like he wanted me to notice him. I told him it was fine, I wasn't scared, and kept walking. I finished unloading, set up camp, and got a fire going. I was pretty worn out after the long drive and carrying my gear, so I settled into my camp chair and started making some chili mac for dinner. It was a gorgeous evening, not too warm, and golden hour over the river was always a beautiful sight, so I was really enjoying the moment. I could see the 2 guys swimming upstream, but they were far enough away that it was easy to ignore them. By the time I finished eating, they had walked past my camp on the opposite bank and headed into the woods. As I went down to the river to get water for my dishes, I heard the stocky guy call out, "Hey, just wanted to let you know I'm a good guy. Okay? Maybe I should have been more on alert, but honestly, it didn't bother me much at the time. I just thought he was awkward and left it at that, responding politely with an okay, and hoping he'd leave me alone if I acted nice but uninterested." Some time passed, and I was lost in my thoughts, reflecting on the past week, when he limped up to my camp. He was groaning faintly, like he was in pain. I don't remember exactly what we said, but he ended up sitting at my site, telling me he had some old injuries that got worse in cold water. I should mention here, back then I was pretty passive, especially with strangers. As I've gotten older, I've worked on setting clearer boundaries, but this was one of those times I didn't. Looking back, I always wish I had told him to leave right away. I'm not sure it would have worked, but I regret not speaking up more. That said, because of past experiences, I had this habit of trying to be a good listener when someone seemed troubled. I figured if I wanted people to treat me kindly when I was struggling, I should offer that same kindness. He definitely seemed to be going through something and, from the outside, looked like someone who'd had some hard luck, even if his behavior was odd. He stayed and started sharing all sorts of stories about his life. Stories that were clearly exaggerated, the kind of tall tales a kid might tell. As time went on, the stories got stranger. He told me his injuries were from falling a long way on a construction job, where his hand got speared on a metal bar. He claimed he'd managed to pull himself off and fall the rest of the way, breaking his legs or something along those lines. I just nodded along, saying things like, "Oh wow," and "that must have hurt." He also shared that he was recently homeless after breaking up with his girlfriend, which was why he was living in his truck, the blue Ford. He told me he worked as a DJ at a local bar and made good money, and then went even further, saying he was a 5-star chef and describing some gross-sounding recipe he invented, basically a soup made from watered-down fruit jelly. He then said he used to be in the military, part of some elite team, and mentioned that the guns I'd seen earlier were just BB guns. He even showed me some fancy twirls with one and tried to impress me with his shooting skills, which were honestly just okay. At one point, he even gave me one of the BB guns, saying it reminded him of bad thoughts. I accepted it awkwardly, already feeling pretty uncomfortable but unsure how to make him leave. As the evening went on, things got stranger. He began bringing more of his things from his truck over to my camp. Little by little, with each new conversation sparking a show and tell. I can't remember everything he brought, but it included his guitar and a bunch of random items. He tried to give me some of it, but after the BB gun, I started refusing. Eventually, the conversation shifted to some dark personal stuff. Childhood traumas, strict military father, an abusive cousin, and he described things in uncomfortable detail. He got very close, looked me dead in the eye without blinking, and said, "And that's why I'd never hurt you." My skin crawled. I did have a few things for protection, like a hunting knife and bear spray, but technically he hadn't done anything threatening yet. Not long after, his ex-girlfriend showed up. He introduced me as a friend. They talked briefly, and then he ignored her to focus on me again. The whole thing made me feel even more uneasy. She didn't stay long and drove off quickly, probably upset. At that point, I told him I was heading to bed, hoping he'd take the hint and leave. He said he needed some time alone, and I thought I was in the clear. But when I got into my tent, I found a cheap ring left on my pillow. He must have put it there when I went to the bathroom. Outside, I could hear him pacing, muttering to himself, head in his hands. A strong urge to leave hit me. Even if he wasn't going to hurt me, he was at least going to ruin the peaceful trip I'd planned. I started packing up right away. When he asked what I was doing, I told him I was just heading out. Since I was car camping, I had a fair bit of stuff, so it took a few trips. On one trip back up the path, he stood in the middle, complaining that my flashlight was too bright. I didn't say anything, just stepped around him. For the next few trips, I kept one hand free, ready to grab my hunting knife if needed. On my second to last trip, he came out of the dark near his truck, crying, saying, "But I didn't do anything wrong." I ignored him, grabbed the last of my stuff, and hurried to my car. I left behind a bundle of firewood. It just wasn't worth the risk to go back. I slammed the doors shut, got in, and was beyond relieved when my old car started right up. I drove the 4 hours back home. Halfway through the drive, I finally had cell service and called my mom to tell her what happened. She was upset that I hadn't told her where I was going. I told my dad and stepmom, who I was living with at the time, and they were just glad I was safe. My dad later suggested I think about getting a gun if I planned to keep camping alone. The next day, when I went out to drive to meet friends, I found my tire was completely flat. I felt incredibly lucky that hadn't happened at the campsite or in the mountains, where I had no cell reception. I'm in my mid-20s now and moved to the city about 6 months ago. When my roommate and best friend helped me move, he found the BB gun and was confused, thinking it was real. I laughed and told him the story. I haven't been back to that site since, and if I do, I'll definitely bring a friend. Going alone is off the list. I've had a few unsettling experiences in my life. Not sure if that makes me unlucky or just a magnet for weird situations, but this one still gives me chills. Back in the early 90s, when I was 9, my family went to visit my uncle who lived deep in the countryside of Arkansas. He owned a big piece of land, and the only other people living on that road were family. So it wasn't the kind of place where random folks would just wander by. Because of that, nobody ever locked their doors. Relatives were always dropping in for one thing or another. One evening while we were there, my parents and my aunt and uncle decided to head into the nearest town to go bowling. My brothers, who were 10 and 13, my 2 girl cousins, 7 and 15, and I'm female, stayed home. It was still light outside when the adults left, but soon a heavy rain rolled in and it got dark quickly. We used to play this game that was basically hide and seek in the dark, but we called it Vampire. There was a thin mattress on the living room floor that some of the kids would crash on at night, and the person who was it would lie on it, folded over themselves like a coffin, and count down to midnight. Once they reached midnight, they'd go looking for the rest of us. With all the lights off and the house out in the middle of nowhere, it was pitch black inside. You couldn't even see your hand right in front of your face. That meant 2 things for the game. 1, you had no idea where the vampire was looking, and 2, you could be super lazy and just hide close to the living room near the coffin. You can probably guess which type I was. That night, my brother Andy, who was 10, was it and was doing the countdown. I was hiding maybe 6 feet away. As he was counting, a flash of lightning lit up the room. I can't remember if I was already glancing at the living room window or if the lightning drew my eyes there, but with that bright flash, I saw a man with his face pressed against the window. He had his hands cupped around his eyes, trying to see in, and he looked exactly like the kind of person you'd cross the street to avoid. Heavy-set, messy beard, rough-looking. Every hair on my body stood up all at once. I tried to tell myself I hadn't seen what I thought I saw, but then Andy quietly whispered, "If anyone's in here, don't move." I barely croaked out, "I'm here," just as another lightning flash hit, and the guy was still there, but now he was facing the front door. Andy and I both knew exactly what was about to happen. The man was only about 5 feet from the front door, and Andy was the same distance, but there was a couch between him and the door. Without missing a beat, Andy leapt over the couch and locked the door just as the man started jiggling the handle. At that point, Andy must have figured it was best to let the man know we were home, that we knew he was there, because he flipped on the porch light and then started turning on all the lights inside the house. It might sound odd, but I was too terrified to panic. I was completely relying on Andy to tell me what to do. He told me to go lock the other doors and started yelling for the rest of the kids to come out and lock all the windows. Honestly, the next few minutes are a bit blurry in my memory. I remember everything up to that point crystal clear, and I remember the ending well, but the middle part is fuzzy. I know I locked the side door and then the sliding glass door at the back. Over the years, we've talked about it, and some of us remember seeing the man at the back door too. I'm not sure if I recall that. What I clearly remember is locking that sliding door and standing there frozen, hearing Andy's calm but firm voice say, "Close the curtain. Listen to me, close the curtain." So I did. Andy doesn't remember that part, but I can still hear his voice in my head. We tried calling the police, but my uncle and aunt had an old-fashioned party line, and it didn't work, either because of the storm or because a neighbor left it off the hook. For those who don't know, a party line was where several homes shared one phone line, each with a different ring. You could even pick up the phone and listen to your neighbor's conversation. We also tried to reach someone on my uncle's CB radio, but had no luck. My uncle was a hunter, but all his rifles were gone because my older cousin was away on a hunting trip. The only thing we could find was a BB gun that looked pretty realistic. I remember Andy putting me in charge of the phone and Scott, my older brother, on the CB. Meanwhile, Andy stood by the small window on the front door with the BB gun. About half an hour later, Andy said, "He's back. He's walking up the driveway." We all froze, but Andy opened the front door, stepped out onto the porch, aimed the gun, and shouted, "Get out of here right now." And then we heard our cousin Eric, who lived a little ways down the road, say, "You know that's a BB gun, right?" Even though Eric was only about 16, we felt like we'd just been saved when he showed up. Eric seemed skeptical of our story, like he thought we were messing with him, even though we hadn't known he was coming over. But he stayed with us until the adults got home. To be honest, I can't remember if we even told our parents what happened when they returned. There was definitely no police report or anything. We just went on with the visit. After that, though, we never played vampire again without someone bringing up that night. I talked to Andy recently. He doesn't have social media, but he's glad people think he handled things well. He said the story lines up with his memory, but that the man was also at the back door. We talked about it before, and I hadn't been sure if he remembered that part. Andy told me that while I was locking the side door, he saw the man moving toward the back of the house. So he told me to hurry and lock the sliding door. Those doors were close together, so I was the closest one. According to Andy, as soon as I flipped the lock, the man was standing there, looking right at me. I remember standing there for a moment, frozen, and that's when Andy told me to close the curtain. We also saw him one more time in the front yard. I've remembered this all along, but I checked with Andy to be sure before including it. The front yard was big, with a long gravel driveway, and off to one side were some old cars my cousins were working on. Typical country scene. While we were keeping watch, we saw the man messing with one of the cars. It was actually Eric's. When he couldn't get it started, he walked off into the woods that bordered the property. We never saw him again after that. So, a few months back, I was out on a hike with a couple of friends. We live near the mountains in western Pennsylvania, and we were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop we've done many times before. We decided to stop for some photos and have a snack at the overlook. This spot had a few picnic tables, benches, and a small parking area. While we were sitting and chatting, I noticed a man wandering around the parking lot by himself. He was walking without any real purpose, staring down at the ground. What stood out to me was that he was dressed in jeans and a button-up shirt. Definitely not what you'd expect someone to wear on a hike. We decided to continue on the last 2 miles of the loop. This stretch heads downhill toward the visitor center of the park and cuts through the side of the mountain. The trail eventually ends at the parking lot where we'd left our car. It's a narrow trail, so you have to walk in single file, and visibility isn't great. I was leading the group, chatting with my friend behind me. When I glanced back at her, I noticed the same man from the parking lot was now right behind her, walking way too close. I immediately got a bad feeling in my stomach. He had no backpack, no water, no hiking shoes, just regular sneakers, and something about the look in his eyes made my skin crawl. We kept walking, but he stayed right behind us. I told my friend I needed to fix my shoelace as an excuse to stop and let him go by, just in case he was only trying to walk faster. She caught on to what I was doing right away, and we both stepped aside. He seemed surprised when we moved, and when my friend politely greeted him, he just stared without a word. That's when I noticed he was holding a stick. As I fiddled with my shoe, my friend positioned herself between us, and he finally passed. We decided to give him some space, waiting for him to get further ahead. But instead, he slowed down almost right away. We waited a little longer, and when he reached the furthest point we could still see, he turned around and stared up at us. At that moment, we agreed this situation felt too strange, and we didn't want to have to pass him again. So we turned around and hiked back up toward the overlook area with the parking lot and tables. After a few minutes of walking uphill, I looked back, and sure enough, he was following us up the trail. I told my friend to pick up the pace, and we hurried back to the parking area where we'd been earlier. Once there, we started discussing what to do, deciding to wait and see if he came all the way back up the trail. Since more people were around in that area, we felt a bit safer. We waited for about 20 minutes, and nothing happened. We talked about how maybe he had just continued along the trail and was long gone, or maybe he was waiting further down where it was more deserted. A few minutes later, a couple came up the trail, apparently doing the loop in the opposite direction from us. We approached them and asked if they had seen anyone along the path between the two parking areas. They mentioned seeing a young guy sitting on a rock about halfway down and described the man who had been following us. We told them about our encounter, and the wife started discussing with us whether he might actually be a danger or not. That's when the husband cut in and said, "We should call a ranger. He wasn't just sitting there. He had a knife and was carving that stick." Of course, we called the ranger immediately. The kind couple walked the last stretch of trail with us to make sure we got to our car safely, and they even gave us their phone numbers in case we needed anything else. Later, the rangers went through the trail, but there was no sign of the man. I still wonder where he went or what became of him, but I'm thankful to know that trusting my gut was the right call. So, to the creepy knife-carving guy in the woods, let's never cross paths again.